Thank you, EDS. Good morning. Oh, come on now, you can do better. You just had a break, got a little fresh air, it's cool outside. Good morning. And that's much better. And by the way, you look marvelous. My accent may not sound like it. I actually grew up in Harrisburg. I shared that with several of the speakers who preceded me. Now, I'm sure they were dignified ladies growing up, and I'm sure I'm among sophisticated ladies and gentlemen, but now I can't complain about the heat because there were some Saturday nights I might go out to a house party, and if you grew up in the North, you know where the windows began to sweat? Oh, you don't know what I'm talking about. Okay, well, maybe it was Sunday morning when I was sitting in church after Saturday night and it was hot, and I do one of those foxhole prayers, please, Lord, if you just let me make it through this service, I promise I won't do it again. So I'm living proof that we all can turn our lives around. I just want to talk with you a little bit about respect, learning, and leading in correction. And I want to dedicate my remarks to Helen A. Allen. Now, Helen Allen was a special assistant to then Governor Lamar Alexander. And this was when I was straight out of college, my very first professional job. And the only reason I had a chance to work with her on a number of important projects is, frankly, the men in my office did not want to work with or under a woman. They couldn't conceive of themselves doing that. And I think perhaps one or two of you all may have encountered that along the way in your careers. I jumped at the chance. And so, much like Commissioner Carney, I took a kind of a roundabout path, but eventually found myself working around corrections and then eventually in corrections. And so I have to thank Helen Allen as really being that mentor and coach, a woman who helped me to find that path to professionalism and ultimately to correction. And out of that, I learned the lesson to take calculated risks. I jumped in the deep end of the pool when it definitely wasn't comfortable, wasn't within my skill set or experience base. And the other thing is I learned that even as I was a mentee, that I needed to pass it on, to pay it forward, to be a mentor and a coach. And that's something that I've tried to carry forward in the work that I've done in corrections. Very early on, I learned the importance of effective listening. And one of the things I recently came across this, and I don't know if this is myth or fact, I did some research on it, but the research suggests that women talk more than men, and women's communication styles are different than men's styles. In fact, the data seems to suggest that women may use 20,000 words a day, and men only use 7,000. Now, I don't know if that's true or not, but I do believe that there are differences in communication styles, not only between men and women, but across different cultures. Different people just have different ways of communicating. And so the lesson to me is that regardless of the situation, I've learned that everybody has a story to tell and something to offer. Don't sleep on what people around you have to offer. I had the privilege during a stint when I worked with the city of Memphis of working with the sanitation workers. And by the way, a day like today was nothing to them because they had to go out every day moving these heavy trash cans. In fact, that was the basis, in fact, for the strike in 1968. And so I'd sit down with them at the transit stations and they would offer up suggestions about how their work life could be improved and how they could better serve the citizens of the city of Memphis. And I learned that I needed to meet each one where they were and listen to the stories that they had to share and listen to the suggestions that they had to offer as how we might better serve the citizens. So part of that is don't always talk to yourself. And when you're working with your team, don't engage in groupthink. Encourage people to offer up, not to feel as though they are less than or they don't have things to offer, because we're only as strong as what each of us has to offer to the team. Another thing that I learned early on is to check your biases. Early on in my professional career with the department, I had the honor of serving and participating in an executive leadership program. And during the first week, as we gathered together and talked about our experiences, there was a guy who was there from the Attorney General's office The facilitators, our Department of Human Resources, had made sure that we had a representative balance, about 50-50 male, female, geographic diversity. Tennessee's not unlike Pennsylvania in that you almost have 3 states, east, west, and middle, ethnic diversity and the like. And so as we sat there and talked about our various perspectives, the guy, Vincent, offered up this assessment, differences between men and women. And his assessment is that when a new woman walks into a professional situation, all the other women in the room immediately look at her shoes. I felt a chill sweep across the room. I was about 2 seats down from Vincent. I immediately slid over 4 seats down because I knew this could not end well. And he got a lot of immediate feedback. Well, we worked through team projects through the course of the summer, and I was impressed by the contributions and the participation of everyone in the group. At the end of the last week, we were gathered in a classroom at the University of Tennessee in Knoxville, and as we walked in, I guess it was the next to the last morning, right at Vincent's chair, where he would sit, were about 40 pairs of women's shoes. I think he got the message. And the lesson that I learned is that, one, women have to battle, and it's been spoken to this morning, with this sense of being underestimated, the stereotypes, the biases. And so that's certainly something that all of us have to do with the members of our team, is check our own biases. But the other thing is that you should never underestimate your team. Going back again to the effective listening and meeting people where they are. Never underestimate your team. And by the way, these are things that I found not only, as EDS Moore-Smeal talked about, in my corrections time, but I've had the privilege of being in city government, county government, private sector. And so these are principles that I found that are really universal. What you learn here in corrections is transferable, and I would even argue that given the kind of stresses and strains that we have to deal with, we have to deliver on our mission each day, every day, whether it's inside an institution or outside in the community. These are transferable skills. So don't ever think that somehow or other there's some magic in the private sector. And you may hear that as we enter an election season. The private sector does it better. I challenge anybody, except maybe in private corrections, who's worked inside these fields, to come in and do what we do on any given day. One of the other lessons I've learned, and we're seeing it right now with our department, is never waste a crisis. Very often we find that if there's a constant in correction, it's that there's change. Change is always happening. But disruption is good, and sometimes even destruction. Though we may look at the fires in California on the mountainside and talk about how terrible a thing that is, actually that's Mother Nature's way of cleansing itself, and but for man's presence, those fires would be the way of giving new birth. So even as we work through the current issues, through the introduction of synthetics into our various facilities and that we encounter in the community, as we adapt to that, as we grow with that, we find that there's some lessons that we can learn. In Tennessee, coming out of the financial crash of 2007, 2008, the state's budget was incredibly strained. See, Tennessee does not have a state income tax. And so the only source of revenue for general government is sales tax and property tax. Now, it's a good thing if you're working and you don't have to pay the property tax. But in a field like corrections, which tends to be the last priority very often, it really creates some challenges for resources. And so rather than us look at trying to cut, we began to look strategically at our operations. And so we went through what it costs us to operate our different facilities. We seized upon an opportunity not only to reduce our footprint in terms of the number of institutions, and this may sound similar to what we've had to do here in Pennsylvania, but it gave us the opportunity to emphasize reentry, because reentry works, reentry is cost effective, and to beef up what we did in the community. Now, we were a little bit ahead of our time, but we were able to meet our immediate objectives and set the stage for some of the things that continue to go forward. And I was pleased to see when I moved here to Pennsylvania that we were doing many of the same things. You may not be able to make the policy argument about the goodness of woman or man, but you can always go to a legislator and talk about saving a buck. And if you can do that, you just have to find different ways to attack the same problem and know who your audience is. But never, ever waste a crisis. I started with the Pennsylvania Department of Correction in the Bureau of Community Correction. And it's a fantastic experience, great group of folks, although I've had the privilege now to work with probation and parole. The first winter I was here, there was a snowstorm, and I realized I was non-essential, but I came to work anyway. And I looked around the room, and of my management team, it happened to be that there's one female, 4 males. And that one female didn't come in that day. And as I looked around at a room full of dudes, it just felt weird. And then it hit me. And I don't mind saying it, in roughly 30 years of service, I've never had a leadership team that was not at least about half female. And so being in a room full of guys was just foreign to me. I'm like, what's up with that? And so I had to think about why did I, other than it was just different, why did I feel some kind of way about that, if I may use a turn of phrase. And I realized that it's about diversity in thinking. It's about bringing in different perspectives. It's about having the yin and the yang, if you will, that everybody can't think the same way. Everybody can't look the same way. And that you're not going to find that best solution unless you embrace that diversity and encourage everyone to the table. I look forward to the day when it's not the norm to be in a room full of dudes, when it's not a thing that you have to think about your gender role or what you represent, when we can just be the best people that we are, doing the best job that we can to serve the citizens that we serve. I look forward to that day. A lot has changed in the time when I came in, when nobody wanted to work for or with a woman. This past weekend, it just so happened I was in Detroit for the Jazz Festival. And as I was sitting on Hart Plaza looking up at the GM headquarters, I noticed that one letter at a time was flashing up on the building. R-E-S. And I realized they were celebrating the Queen of Soul's life, Aretha Franklin. And by the way, I promise you, I won't go on for 6 hours like Aretha's funeral. By the way, it's coming out on DVD and Blu-ray in 6 installments. Just kidding, it's a joke, it's a joke. But as they spelled out respect, I thought about standing here before each and every one of you, leaders, professionals in corrections, and I thought about what does respect mean? And so here's what I'd like to share with you. R, recognizing the value in each person. E, effectively listening. S, seizing opportunities to foster growth. P, place people in a posture for success. E, encourage healthy risk-taking. C, cultivating diversity. T, trust your team and yourself. Because I believe that together we can accomplish the seemingly impossible. Thank you so much for the honor of your time and your attention this morning.